I used to believe that silence meant peace. That if no one was yelling, no doors were slammed, no accusations thrown across the room, then everything must be fine. For years, that belief kept me steady while something underneath my life was quietly rotting. My marriage looked normal from the outside. We shared meals, paid bills, showed up to family gatherings together. But somewhere along the way, the warmth disappeared. Conversations became logistical. Touch became accidental. Eye contact felt optional. I noticed the changes long before I admitted them to myself. The phone that never left his hand. The way he'd step outside to take calls. How his laugh sounded lighter when it wasn't meant for me. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself every couple goes through phases. I even convinced myself that wanting more attention was selfish at my age. It was easier to doubt my instincts than to face what they were trying to protect me from. The truth didn't arrive in a dramatic explosion. Came quietly, almost politely. A message seen when it wasn't meant to be. A name I didn't recognize paired with a tone I hadn't heard in years. There was no denying it then. No room left for excuses. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal itself, but how easily my absence had been replaced. I felt interchangeable. Forgettable. Like my role had ended without anyone telling me. I didn't confront him right away. I needed time to breathe, to understand how my life could shift so suddenly without physically moving. When I finally did speak, there were apologies that sounded rehearsed and explanations that circled around accountability without ever landing on it. By the end of that conversation, I knew the marriage I had been trying to save no longer existed. Maybe it hadn't for a long time. The separation happened quietly. No dramatic goodbyes. Just boxes, paperwork, and a strange calm that followed me everywhere. I moved into a smaller place where the walls felt too close and the nights felt endless. Friends checked in at first, then less often. Everyone had their own lives, their own happiness to return to. I didn't blame them. I just felt left behind, and I spent most days replaying memories, wondering where I went wrong, what version of myself I should have been to keep him from looking elsewhere. Shame became my constant companion. I avoided mirrors. I avoided conversations that might lead to questions. I avoided hope altogether. It felt safer to assume that this was it for me. That my story had already peaked and everything left was just maintenance. At that point, I truly believed nothing unexpected could happen in my life again. I was wrong. I tried to draw a line in my mind, something solid enough to stop whatever was forming. I reminded myself of vows, of shared history, of the life I had chosen. But lines are easy to imagine and harder to keep when no one else can see them. The more I resisted, the more aware I became of every small interaction. A message replied too quickly. A joke meant only for me. Silence that felt louder than words. He never crossed a boundary outright, and somehow that made it worse. There was no clear moment to shut down. No obvious offense to call out. Instead, there was tension disguised as normalcy. When he sat across from me, his eyes didn't wander, they settled. When he spoke, it felt measured, careful, as if he knew exactly how much to reveal and how much to hide. I told myself he was just being kind. I told myself kindness didn't mean danger. My husband was oblivious, and that innocence cut deeper than suspicion ever could. He trusted us both, and his trust gave us space we didn't deserve. He'd leave us alone to run errands, to take calls, to rest. Every time the door closed behind him, I felt my chest tighten. Nothing happened, yet everything felt like it could. That possibility became its own weight. One evening, a conversation shifted without warning. We weren't talking about anything important, just life, exhaustion, the strange feeling of getting older and wondering if this was all there was. I admitted quietly that I felt stuck. The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't rush to reassure me. He didn't offer solutions. He just said he understood. And for the first time in a long time, I believe someone truly did. That understanding felt intimate in a way I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't physical. It was emotional, and that made it harder to fight. I started looking forward to conversations I knew I shouldn't want. I replayed them in my head later, analyzing every tone, every pause. I hated myself for it, yet I couldn't deny how alive it made me feel. The guilt became constant, a quiet ache that followed me everywhere. I'd look at my husband and feel like a stranger in my own skin. He was still the man I loved, but something between us felt muted. as if I had turned down the volume without meaning to. I wondered if he sensed it. I wondered if love could survive secrets it didn't even know existed. Then came the moment I could no longer pretend was accidental. Our hands brushed while reaching for the same object. It was brief, almost nothing, but neither of us moved right away. The air changed. I pulled back first, my heart racing, my face burning with shame. He apologized, but his voice betrayed him. So did mine when I said it was fine. That night I couldn't sleep. I realized the secret wasn't what had happened, but what I was allowing to happen inside me. I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't undo, and the most terrifying part was knowing that a small part of me didn't want to turn back. After that night, I tried to create distance. I answered less, avoided eye contact, found excuses to stay busy whenever we visited. I told myself that ignoring the discomfort would make it disappear. But the harder I pulled away, the more aware I became of how deeply his words had settled inside me. They echoed in quiet moments, especially when my husband was absent, lost in his routines and exhaustion. His father never chased me openly. That was the part that confused me the most. He remained respectful in front of everyone, careful with his tone, controlled with his presence. But when we were alone, even briefly, there was an intensity in his attention that felt deliberate. He spoke to me as if we shared a private understanding, as if something had already been acknowledged without being named. He started framing his concern as worry for my happiness. He spoke about marriage, about how love changes, about how some people learn to endure instead of live. I listened more than I should have. I didn't encourage him, but I didn't stop him either. Somewhere along the way, silence became permission. What frightened me most was how easy it felt to talk to him. I found myself opening up about things I had never said out loud. How lonely I felt, how unseen, how tired of pretending everything was fine. He never criticized his son directly, but he made comparisons that didn't need to be spoken fully. He made me feel understood, and that understanding slowly began to matter more than my fear. I fought it internally every day. I reminded myself who he was, what he represented, how wrong it all was. I told myself attraction was just a thought, not an action. But thoughts have weight, and mine were starting to pull me in directions I didn't recognize. I began noticing his presence before he spoke. I became aware of the way his voice affected me. That realization filled me with shame. Then one afternoon he said it plainly. Not crudely. Not aggressively. He said he felt something he had no right to feel but felt it anyway. He said he had tried to ignore it, but pretending hadn't changed the truth. I remember my hands trembling, my breath shallow, my mind racing for the right response. I wanted to leave, to shut it down completely. Instead, I stayed still. I told him it was wrong. I told him it could never happen. He didn't argue. He only said that feelings don't disappear just because we wish them away. That response unsettled me more than pressure ever could. There was no force, no demand, just certainty. After that, everything changed inside me. I started measuring my days by moments of avoidance and moments of weakness. I felt guilty even when nothing happened. I felt disloyal simply for thinking. I looked at my husband and wondered when I had stopped wanting to tell him everything. What scared me most wasn't his desire. It was my hesitation. The pause before saying no. The way I replayed his words when I was alone. I realized that the line I believed was unbreakable had already begun to blur. And once that happened, I knew I was standing far closer to a choice than I was willing to admit. Living with the secret changed how I moved through the world. Every normal moment felt staged, like I was constantly acting in a role I no longer deserved. I watched my words carefully, measured my reactions, learned how to hide guilt behind routine. My husband noticed none of it, and that mercy felt like punishment. His kindness, his trust, made the weight heavier instead of lighter. I avoided his best friend after that. Not dramatically, not in a way that would raise suspicion, but deliberately. Missed calls. Short replies. Excuses that sounded reasonable. Distance became my shield, though it never brought relief. I could feel the secret stretching between us, unspoken but present. When we did cross paths, our conversations were careful and restrained. Like two people pretending they'd never shared a language only they understood. Time passed. But the guilt didn't fade the way I hoped it would. It evolved. Some days it was sharp and immediate. Other days it was dull, settling into the background like a constant hum. I questioned myself endlessly. Was it worse to confess and destroy everything, or to stay silent and let the lie live on? I told myself I was protecting my husband, but deep down I knew I was protecting myself. The change in me eventually showed. My husband asked if I was okay more often. He noticed my distance, my distraction. I blamed stress, exhaustion, anything that sounded harmless. He believed me because why wouldn't he? I hadn't given him a reason not to. That realization haunted me more than anger ever could have. Then came the moment I didn't expect. One evening, my husband mentioned his friend casually, something about how distant he'd been lately. He wondered out loud if he'd done something wrong. The room felt too small to breathe in. I forced myself to stay calm, to respond normally. But inside, everything unraveled. I realized the secret wasn't just mine anymore. It was shaping other relationships, causing ripples I couldn't control. Nothing dramatic followed. No confrontation. No revelation. Life continued, painfully ordinary. That was the hardest part. There was no clear ending, no punishment that balanced the mistake. Just consequences that lingered quietly. The friendship between them never fully recovered, though neither of them understood why. My marriage survived, but it wasn't untouched. Some intimacy once lost never fully returns. I still carry the secret. Not because I'm proud of it, but because some truths once revealed don't heal, they only break. I've learned that betrayal doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like a normal life with an invisible fracture running through it. I wake up, go about my day, laugh at the right moments, and love my husband in the ways I still can. But there are moments, quiet ones, when I remember how easily everything I valued almost disappeared. And in those moments, I understand that the deepest consequences aren't always external. Sometimes they live inside you, shaping who you become long after the choice is made. This is my truth, one I will carry for the rest of my life, unseen, unresolved, and never forgotten.